My name is Eva Loren, 37 years old, a data scientist who once stood behind the most powerful artificial intelligence system ever approved by the US government. That morning, I stood silently before the glass wall of a high-rise office, looking down at the White House roof disappearing into the rainy haze, holding a copy of a classified letter my father had sent just before he died. One line in that letter read, "If they erase you from history, remind them who wrote it." The Dahlia system I created had just been stolen and activated in a military operation, by my own family without my permission. But they forgot the most important part. I didn't just write it. I still hold the most dangerous piece. Have you ever been pushed out of something you poured your soul into, by the very people you trusted? If you've ever been betrayed by the one you trusted most, leave a comment. Tap like if you believe the truth can be silent but it never disappears. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is just getting started. 12 years ago, I was still a final-year PhD student at MIT. Back then, my entire world revolved around data, predictive modeling, and late nights fueled by strong coffee, my hands stained with dry erase marker ink. I had what everyone dreamed of, a job offer from Apple along with a signing bonus big enough to pay off my student debt and buy a small apartment in Cambridge. But I turned it down. My father called me at 3 a.m., his voice hoarse from endless meetings but still filled with hope. He said, "That little Dahlia of yours. If you bring her here, I believe she could transform the national supply chain system. I'm building a real company, not just for profit but for something that lasts. I need you to come home." And I did. The company was just getting started. There were only 7 of us squeezed into a rented basement office in Arlington. Ethernet cables tangled like bird nests, whiteboards covered in messy hypotheses, and the coffee was always cold. But there, I felt something MIT labs never gave me, a sense of belonging. My father didn't just believe in me. He saw something I always tried to hide. I'm not a great speaker, not as charming as my brother, but I can see structure in chaos. And I used that to build Dahlia. I rebuilt the system's entire core, added layers of real-time data, sequence analysis, and multi-tiered forecasting. Every line of code I wrote was tied to a specific vision: to make logistics systems more transparent, agile, and less wasteful. I named it Dahlia after the flower my mother used to grow, the kind that survives frost and keeps blooming through the harshest winters. At the time, Noah was the COO, the organizer, fundraiser, and presenter. He knew how to wear a suit right, how to get investors to nod. I worked behind the screen. Noah used to joke, half serious, "You're the brain, I'm the face." But anything with a face eventually learns how to steal the role of the brain. 3 years later, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. That news hit like a punch to the chest, not because it was sudden but because he'd hidden it for so long. I found the prescription on his desk. When I confronted him, he simply said, "Don't panic. I still have unfinished work." From that day on, I worked even harder. I stayed in the lab late into the night, hardly leaving the building. I skipped Thanksgiving, missed my 30th birthday. Every update to Dahlia was a piece of my personal life carved out. I poured everything I had into it. I didn't notice that while I was buried in code, something outside the lab door had changed. Noah stopped calling me co-founder when introducing me to partners. My mother, Elaine, began appearing regularly in board meetings she once called "no place for a woman." Gradually, everything I built was rebranded as collective intellectual property. One night, I was working until 3 a.m. When I went upstairs to grab some files, I overheard my mother speaking softly in the conference room, like she was gently advising someone. "Eva's brilliant, but she doesn't have leadership qualities. If she's in charge, this company will never gain the government's trust." I stood frozen at the door. The next day, my father called me to his private cabin, the small wooden house in Northern Virginia where we used to roast marshmallows when I was little. He didn't ask about work. He simply handed me a contract, his hands trembling. "I don't know how much time I have left, but I did this secretly. Read Clause 14b. I opened the contract. That clause was written in a noticeably smaller font, wedged between 2 sections about equity splits. It read clearly, "All artificial intelligence platforms bearing the name Dahlia or its derivatives, whether current or future, are the sole intellectual property of Eva Loren. No organization or individual, including shareholders, may transfer, restructure, or exploit the system without the author's signed consent. I looked up at him. He smiled faintly. You'll need it. Not now. But one day they'll forget who started it all. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and hugged him tightly. 3 months later he passed away. At the funeral I wanted to give a eulogy. But Noah stepped up to the podium first, delivering a short, moving speech full of leadership flair. I just stood in the front row, gripping the printed version of the final dahlia build I had meant to place on the casket. My mother never looked at me. She just held Noah's hand tightly. From that day on, I stopped being invited to major meetings. I started receiving emails late, was excluded from high-level government projects. I thought it was just the natural fallout of grief. But in truth, it was the beginning of a deliberate erasure. And I let them do it. Until that morning when I stood by the window on the 19th floor holding the letter stamped by the Pentagon, and realized the moment my father warned me about had arrived. That morning, the conference room at the Department of Defense headquarters in Arlington was flooded with natural light from the large windows. I stood before the giant screen, presenting every function of the Dahlia system with absolute confidence and precision after more than a year of preparation. Across the long table sat powerful individuals, their eyes fixed on every data point, every shifting graph as I spoke. I could tell they understood the weight of this project. This wasn't just a job, it was the life's work I had poured my youth into. When I finished, a round of polite applause followed, more out of formality than genuine admiration. So I felt satisfied. I had done my part. A quiet pride filled my chest, bringing back memories of sleepless nights, harsh rejections, and the dismissive words I had once endured from Noah from my mother. Then I caught Noah's gaze. My brother, once my ally, now standing cold and rigid like a marble statue. His smile wasn't warm, just a flat curve that made my skin crawl. He was about to speak and the air grew heavy. Noah's voice was deep, emotionless. Eva, your work is incredible. But starting today, tech operations will fall under a new director. Felt like a slap. My heart clenched. The sounds around me faded, leaving only his words echoing in my ears. I stood there staring at him, searching for a hint of regret, of explanation, of anything human. But all I found was hollow silence. The conference door opened. A woman in a black suit walked in. I didn't know her name, just that she worked in HR, someone I'd barely interacted with. Her face was expressionless, cold. She approached with a white envelope and my company badge. She spoke with a smooth, indifferent voice. Your badge and system access documents will be collected now. I knew what that meant. No more access to the meeting rooms. No more data clearance. No place in the project I had helped build from day one. My thoughts raced. I had given everything to Dahlia. Every line of code, every algorithm bore my mark. Now it was all gone. Just like that. What hurt me the most wasn't Noah's betrayal. It was my mother's indifference. Elaine sat there, back straight, arms folded across her chest as if shielding herself from emotion, eyes fixed on anything but me. The cold air between us clenched at my heart as if her silence was saying, "You don't belong to this family anymore." I stood still for a moment, lost for words. It felt like I was caught in the eye of a storm with no way out. But I knew this wasn't the time for yelling or tears. I lowered my head, closed my laptop carefully, gathered my documents, each movement slow but deliberate. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't try to convince anyone. The conference room door closed behind me like the lid of a coffin, burying the years of passion I had poured into that place. Out in the building's main hall, my ID card had already been deactivated. I couldn't move forward. The receptionist glanced up, then looked away, pretending not to see me. I stayed silent, neither angry nor weak. I walked toward the elevator, feeling like I was leaving behind a part of my memory I didn't want to forget but couldn't hold on to. On the way down to the basement, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. A soft voice called out, "Eva, don't let them do this to you." I turned but saw no familiar face. Just a new security guard. Someone who had quietly watched me through all those lonely days. As I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun was beginning to fade behind the skyline. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, breathing in deeply. The pain I felt wasn't just disappointment. It was the agony of being erased from something I had created. In that moment, I knew one thing for sure. They could take away my title, my access badge, but not the one thing still in my possession. The contract my father had prepared, the final weapon I would use to defend myself and what I had built. I returned home just as the sky was darkening. I didn't turn on the lights. Didn't turn on the radio. Just the sound of my heels tapping against the hardwood floor, dry, firm, like a metronome marking the rhythm of losses I hadn't yet fully grasped. I walked straight to the bedroom, a place I'd barely visited in recent years during constant deadlines. The safe still sat beneath the bookshelf, the one my father and I installed when we first built the house. He told me once, "It doesn't matter what you keep in here. Some things don't belong on servers." I laughed at the time, thinking he was being overly cautious. I knelt down, opened the floor panel, turned the lock manually. Each click echoed like a slow heartbeat in the silence. When the final turn aligned, the safe door opened with a soft metallic sigh. The scent of cold steel and old paper drifted out like a whisper from the past. I opened the black folder labeled, "Do not open, unless needed." Inside, everything was meticulously arranged, almost sacred. The original contract signed by my father and his private attorney, copies of intellectual property registration for the Dahlia system, maps of source code dated before I submitted the prototype to the Department of Defense. A handwritten letter folded into quarters, the ink slightly smudged at the edges with age. And finally, a gray felt-wrapped USB drive, embroidered with 3 cursive words, "For Eva." I plugged the USB into my old laptop, the only one I had never connected to the internet. A simple folder appeared, audio_12_17. I clicked. A deep, slightly hoarse voice filled the silence. "If you're hearing this, then what I feared has probably come true." I sat up straighter, fingers grazing the speaker as if that would bring him closer. "I don't entirely blame them, Eva. But I believe you need protection your family can't always give you. Because your mind reaches beyond what others can understand. And for that you'll be pushed out, especially when they fear losing control. I left you the original contract and copyright proof. But more importantly, I spoke to the one person you'll need to call if things go too far. Sam Whitaker. His old office is in Georgetown. He understands why I did this. And he's never broken a promise." I couldn't hold back. My hand touched the screen. Even though he was gone, the way he'd prepared everything made me feel like he was still watching over me, quietly, steadily, without show. I opened the documents beside me, turning each page slowly. Under intellectual property, my name stood clear and bold beneath the words, "Sole author of the foundational architecture, knowledge model, and deep learning system of Dahlia, with all derivative or modified works requiring written consent from the author." The next page was the original equity breakdown chart. I remembered the day we signed it. Noah still called me partner back then. Now my name was near the bottom of the list, but the most critical clause remained unchanged: veto rights over any tech transfer. Eva Loren. I also found a notarized copy of the co-founder certificate from the business registry, bearing 3 signatures: mine, my father's, and Noah's. But one detail stood out. The notary seal belonged to someone named Clara Wynne, someone I'd never met. I paused, flipped to the last page. A handwritten note in my father's slanted script: "If everything's erased, find Clara. She holds the second copy." I closed the folder, heart still heavy. I didn't know if I should feel angry, hurt, or grateful for his preparation. But I did know one thing. My silence hadn't come from weakness. It came from believing family mattered more than reputation. I checked the clock. It was nearly 10 p.m. I stood up, poured a glass of cold water, placed the documents back in the safe, locked it. No complaints. No tears. Just one clear feeling rising inside me. The time for silence had ended. And I wouldn't let everything my father prepared go to waste. Leaving the room, I pulled out my phone and searched for Sam Whitaker in my old contacts. The number wasn't saved, but I remembered it by heart. I dialed. 3 rings later, someone answered. "Eva." Sam's voice came through, tired but alert. "I figured you'd call. Something happened, didn't it?" I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window where streetlights cast pale shadows across the glass. "My father said you were the only person I could trust if I got erased from what I built." Sam was silent for a beat, then replied slowly, "I still have the keys to the old office. Meet me tomorrow morning." I hung up. Nothing more needed to be said. Because from now on, Every step I took wouldn't be defensive. It would be preparation for what's coming. And I'd be the one writing the final clause. The next morning, I arrived at Sam's office at 7:15 sharp. The sky hadn't fully brightened, but the streets of Georgetown already had a few people walking with coffee in hand. Sam's office was on the second floor of an old bookstore. No signage. Just a brown wooden door with frosted glass that read, Samuel Whitaker, Legal Counsel. I stepped inside, greeted by the blend of old paper and dried mint, a strangely comforting scent. Sam stood by his desk holding a mug of tea, shirt collar undone, hair still tousled like he'd come straight from sleep into work. "Thought you'd be late," Sam said, setting down his mug and extending his hand. I opened my bag and placed the folder on his desk. I couldn't sleep. He sat down, flipping through the pages in silence. He didn't need words. Sam had always been the kind to read everything through a single glance. After a while he looked up. "Signatures are intact. Notary seal is valid. Clause 14b is crystal clear. They can't override your rights." I stayed quiet, feeling a mix of relief and doubt. Noah will find a way to discredit it. He always does. Sam shook his head, voice firm. "Noah's only powerful when people stay quiet. You have proof, legal standing, and now, you have me." I exhaled, feeling like I wasn't alone anymore. We spent over an hour reviewing every clause, preparing the first legal notice. I wouldn't file a lawsuit yet. I just needed to remind them that I was still here. That I had never truly disappeared. As I left Sam's office, I saw the early morning sunlight sliding across the old tiled roofs, landing gently on my hand. A brief moment of calm before the storm. I had just arrived home when the doorbell rang. It wasn't hurried or frantic, just a steady, patient chime. I opened the door, still halfway lost in the stack of contracts I'd reviewed. And there she was. Jessica. Her hair was shorter than before, tousled by the wind. She held a little girl about 4 years old, asleep against her shoulder, her chestnut curls spilling over the back of Jessica's coat. "We need to talk," Jessica said, her voice hoarse, eyes red from either tears or lack of sleep. I froze. Every memory of her hit me all at once. My best friend through college, the one who held my hand during all-nighters and breakdowns, the woman who once said, "No matter what happens, I've got your back." And yet she was also the one who signed the motion to remove me from the board. The one who stood beside Noah the day I was erased from my own project. I swallowed hard and stepped back. "What are you doing here?" Jessica didn't offer an excuse or explanation. She just looked at me with weary eyes and whispered, "I have no one else to go to." I looked down at the child. She was still asleep, her round face tugging at something deep inside me. "My daughter," Jessica said quickly. "Her name is June." I stepped aside. "Come in." She settled into the armchair in my living room, cradling June tightly. I poured a glass of water and placed it in front of her without speaking. Jessica looked up, her eyes rimmed with red. "I know I don't have the right to show up like this. But I have to tell you something. Not to be forgiven. Just because I can't stay silent anymore." I sat across from her, waiting. She stroked June's hair, her voice cracking. "Noah. He promised he'd give me shares of Dahlia so I could raise my daughter independently. When I got pregnant, he told me he'd step down from the board and start fresh with me." My voice was low, sharp. "And you believed him?" "I did." She let out a bitter laugh. "I didn't just believe him. I defended him. I signed your name on the legal addendum last year, on his instructions. I lied to the lawyers and said you agreed. I deleted your email that objected to the tech transfer." I went still, fingers tightening around the armrest. Jessica looked up at me. "As he promised. Said he'd secure a future for me and my daughter. But 3 months ago he transferred everything into a trust under his name. All I got was an email, 'Best of luck.'" Silence fell. Then she met my gaze. "I still have the unsigned addendum. And the original that shows I forged your signature. I know what Noah buried in the federal filings. I'm ready to hand it all over. But only if you promise not to let this little girl grow up around people like him." I stared at Jessica, then at the sleeping child in her arms. I didn't know if it was genuine regret or just desperation. But in her eyes I saw something we used to share. A quiet kind of honesty barely holding itself together. I nodded slowly. "All right. But from now on you hide nothing." Jessica held June tighter, tears sliding down her cheeks. Nothing. I swear. I stood and went into the kitchen for a blanket. When I returned, she hadn't moved, still clutching her daughter. I placed the blanket down and turned away, not wanting her to see me trembling. Not out of anger, but because I knew the battle ahead might be the harshest one yet. But I wouldn't be fighting alone. And they wouldn't see it coming. The rain came just before midnight. A heavy, steady March rain, quiet and relentless like the grief I hadn't dared name. I'd just gotten June to sleep when the doorbell rang again. One long, deep chime. Not hurried, not uncertain, like someone who knew I'd still be awake. I opened the door. Standing under the porch, soaked to the bone, was Richard. The porch light shone down on his weathered leather jacket, drenched, and his worn baseball cap, the one he always wore during his years as head of security. In his hand was a thick canvas bag zipped shut. His face hadn't changed much since the last time I saw him, still that calm expression behind thick glasses, but his eyes were different now. No longer obedient. Heavy with guilt and resolve. "Hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, voice raspy like the night wind. I shook my head and stepped aside. "Come in." He placed the bag on the table, took off his coat, and gave me a look that clearly cost him effort to summon. "I should have brought this to you sooner. But I hesitated. Thought maybe if I could keep things quiet for you, you wouldn't need to know." I sat across from him. "I've already lost everything, Richard. Peace isn't on the table anymore." He nodded, then slowly unzipped the bag and pulled out a waterproof wrapped hard drive. I made a backup before I got pushed out. They thought I was just some old man who couldn't tell a server from a storage unit, but I've been in this field over 30 years. I know the look people get when they start lying with their eyes. I plugged in the drive, eyes on the screen. "What's on here?" He leaned back, exhausted. "A closed-door meeting. Last August. No official record. But I'd written a script to start audio capture when the cameras were manually disabled. They didn't think I needed video. They forgot sound was enough." I opened the first file. There was static, then a clear, cold voice. "Noah. Eva doesn't need to exist anymore. We have enough engineers to restructure the system. Dahlia's no longer personal property, it's a collective product. Who does she think she is?" Another voice cut in, "Kyle, the CFO. We'll erase her from all technical documentation. Transfer founding rights to the current board. As for the research fund, I moved the undisclosed budget into an intermediary wallet in Estonia. Clean." Then a woman, probably Diana, the deputy HR director, asked, "What about the federal report? The original model's due for interagency presentation." Noah responded curtly, "Use the old signature mock-up. Simulate it. The original is buried deep in cold storage. Who's going to check when she's this silent?" I stopped the file. My heart dropped like I'd been shoved off a cliff. Richard didn't look at me. He just pulled out a thick set of printed documents from the bag. "These are the system logs showing when your name was deleted from the engineering records. And this," he handed me a smaller USB, "is the full source code for the original Dahlia. It includes edit tags proving you were the last one to touch the code. Every line is logged under your credentials." I didn't respond. I just stared at the lines of code streaming down the screen like a violent rainstorm pounding against my chest. But it wasn't sorrow anymore. It was clarity. "Why did you keep all this?" I asked quietly, more to myself than to him. Richard looked at me steadily. "Because I've stood at a crossroads before. I made the wrong choice once a long time ago. You never knew, but your father, he stopped me from walking away. Told me that if even one honest man stayed behind, there was still hope in the system." My throat tightened. "And now it's my turn to keep that promise," he said. Not to him, but to my own conscience. I closed the laptop, not because I needed rest but because I finally had enough. Noah's words echoed in my mind like a blade. "Who does she think she is?" I stood, walked to the safe and carefully locked away the hard drive and USB. "No thank you needed," Richard understood. We were both survivors of the purge, and in that long night of rain, no more words had to be said. He left not long after, his hair soaked, shoulders still drenched, but his posture was noticeably straighter than when he arrived. I stood at the doorway watching his silhouette fade into the rain, knowing in my gut, every curtain would eventually fall. And when it did, they wouldn't be able to hide what had already been exposed. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the roofline, I was already seated in Sam's office. The laptop was open, the hard drive plugged in, and the data neatly organized into layers. Recordings, financial documents, forged signatures, original source code, system logs, Jessica's handwritten statement, and Richard's system verification. We no longer called it evidence. It was a complete blueprint of how Noah and the executive board had quietly dismantled every moral and legal boundary. Sam was on a call with Lieutenant Colonel Laurel Vaughn, an Army attorney and someone he had once worked with during his time overseeing dual-use technology programs at the Pentagon. I could hear the voice from the other end over speakerphone. "Sam? What's going on? Why are you calling so early?" "Laurel," Sam said bluntly, "I need to send you a set of documents. Urgent. It's about the Dahlia AI platform. There are federal-level intellectual property violations and signs of forgery in national defense reports." A pause followed. Then the man's tone shifted, suddenly cold. "Did you just say Dahlia? The system running logistics for our Western military corridors." "I said exactly that. Send it now." In less than 2 hours, the file was encrypted and transmitted through the internal network. Laurel confirmed receipt. He said he'd submit the case directly to the Department of Defense Inspector General, and simultaneously alert the Department of Justice and the Senate Ethics Committee. I sat in the corner of the office, a cup of cold coffee in my hand. Sam turned to me. "You doing okay?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked up at the ceiling fan, spinning slowly as if time itself was exhaling with me. "No," I said softly. "But I'm ready." By late afternoon, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number, area code 202, Washington, D.C. I picked up. A woman's voice, polite and firm, came through. "Hello, this is Amanda Shea, Chief Counsel for the Senate Ethics Committee. We've reviewed the materials submitted by Mr. Whitaker and Lieutenant Colonel Vaughn. Senator Donovan and a select group from the committee would like to request a private meeting with you. Tomorrow in room 412, Hart Building." I was stunned. "They want to meet me in person?" "Yes. And if possible, please prepare copies proving legal ownership of the Dahlia platform. This meeting is not a hearing, but it will be fully recorded." I nodded, though no one could see it. "I'll be there." I hung up and looked at Sam. He sat quietly, fingers laced together, his eyes reading everything written across my face. "You're about to walk into a room where every word you say could become a historical record," he said slowly. "And they won't easily forgive someone who caused part of the military infrastructure to be suspended." I stood up, pulled the original set of documents my father had left me from my bag. "I'm not looking for forgiveness. I just want the truth to be acknowledged." That afternoon, the leaks began. A source from within the Department of Defense confirmed that the AI system used in the logistics supply chain program had been suspended due to serious copyright violations. Federal transport lines were reverting to manual mode, and several defense contracts were temporarily frozen. The press hadn't named me yet, but investors were panicking. Harding Systems stock plummeted. The media swarmed with phrases like internal security breach, founder conflict, and leadership crisis. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Some numbers I recognized, others I didn't. I answered none. I just sat at my desk, sorting each folder, carefully and precisely as if prepping for open-heart surgery. That evening, I sat with Sam on the porch, a cool breeze moving through the trees. The sound of last night's rain had long since faded. We didn't speak. Only the warm streetlight glowed against the porch wood, and the sharp, undeniable feeling that after so many years of being silent, I had finally made them listen. In that fleeting moment, I didn't feel relief or triumph. I only felt steady. And that, for now, was enough to carry me into that cold marble room of politics tomorrow morning. With my name, my documents, and the truth intact. The Hart Building's hallway that morning was bathed in sterile white light, reflecting off the marble floors and the faces of those waiting. I sat on a bench by the wall, folder resting in my lap, hands folded, not shaking but not entirely calm either. At the far end of the corridor, a TV camera lens was being adjusted. The recording light blinked on, signaling this would not pass quietly. Sam walked up, gently resting a hand on my shoulder. "Inside that room are only 8 people. But those 8 can reshape the entire national defense policy." I nodded. eyes fixed on the polished black door carved with a golden eagle seal. It opened a few minutes later, and a middle-aged woman in a khaki suit stepped out. "Miss Lauren, please come in." I stood, folder in hand. Every step I took echoed with the steady knock of truth about to speak. The room was closed-door, high-ceilinged, wood-paneled, with leather chairs and an atmosphere of unwavering formality. 7 men and 1 woman sat around a large oval table. In the center, a microphone glowed red. Senator Donovan looked at me over thin-rimmed glasses and gave a small nod. "You may begin." I opened my folder, pulled out each document and laid them in order. I didn't give a speech. I didn't tell a story. I said exactly what needed to be said. I presented proof of copyright ownership. I played the audio recordings. I submitted records of unauthorized fund transfers, Jessica's written testimony, and Richard's system logs. Every item I brought had a corresponding reference. Nothing was speculative. Everything was signed, recorded, backed up, and verified. No one in the room spoke for the entire 15 minutes I presented. Only the sound of pages turning, pens scribbling, and the soft hiss of audio playback cut through the tension, like a blade slicing through the mask of authority. When I finished, Senator Donovan finally looked up. "Thank you, Ms. We've invited representatives from Harding Systems to this session. They've just arrived." The door behind me opened. Noah entered, his steps firm, his face wearing that same performative calm I knew too well. But my mother walked in behind him, smaller than I remembered, her dark eyes quiet like dying embers. They were invited to sit across from me. No greetings were exchanged. One of the committee members spoke. "Mr. Noah Harding, we now have evidence that you and your executive board used the Dahlia AI platform without legal authorization from its rightful owner. Would you like to respond before we proceed with the indictment?" Noah adjusted his collar, looked at me, then turned toward the senators. "I decline to make a statement until my legal representative is present." "Very well. But you will still hear the charges." And then one by one each charge was read aloud. Federal intellectual property violations, forged signatures on government records, undeclared financial rerouting, manipulation of defense reports. The reader's voice was steady, not too loud, not too soft, but in my mind it struck like a hammer. When the list came to an end, no one said a word. Thought it was over. But then Mrs. Elaine, who had sat silently the entire time, suddenly stood up. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the room like a blade. "That girl was never my daughter." I turned sharply. No one in the room even breathed. She continued, eyes locked on mine. "She's the result of him, my husband, or at least the man I once believed was. A mistake he made with one of the engineers under him. A child born from betrayal. I raised her. But I never considered her my blood. Had I heard those words years ago, they might have shattered me. But now all I felt was something deep inside me drop, then go still. No more pain. Just a quiet weight. A committee member, clearly taken aback, leaned forward. "Do you have any proof of this claim?" An assistant entered, handing over an envelope. Inside was a DNA test. I looked down. My name, Elaine's name, result. No biological relation. I sat up straighter. I didn't feel shame. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I simply said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "My father never denied me. And he was the only one who had the courage to put my name into this company's history. The rest I don't need." No one replied. But I saw Senator Donovan's gaze soften. He closed the file in front of him. "Ms. Loren, the documents you've provided will be forwarded to the Office of the Inspector General and the Department of Justice. Additionally, any use of any version of the Dahlia system will be suspended indefinitely until there's a clear legal ruling." I stood, nodded. I don't want to punish anyone. I just want my name restored to where it belongs. Noah lowered his head. My mother turned away. For the first time, they weren't standing together. And no one could call me a stranger in the very story I had written with blood and silence. I sat alone in my new office, a small room inside a red brick nonprofit building on the outskirts of D.C. There was no fancy nameplate on the door, just a slip of paper that read, "Eva Loren, Volunteer Technical Advisor." The room had no soundproof windows, no security monitors. Just an old wooden desk, one laptop, and a single fabric chair with worn edges. On the screen, I was reviewing the final agreement, Full transfer of usage rights for the Dahlia platform, including all upgrades, extended modules and core source code, would be granted free of charge to the International Disaster Response Support Network. Below the signature line, a bold statement read, "Not for commercial use under any circumstances." I paused for a moment before hitting send. The door opened gently. Jessica walked in without knocking, but not with the anxious energy she used to have. She held June in her arms, the little one squirming before falling asleep against her shoulder. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through striped blinds, casting soft lines of light across the baby's delicate cheek. "I just heard," Jessica said quietly. "You regained operational control of Dahlia." I didn't turn around. "Yes. And I just signed over the entire system." Jessica walked slowly to the desk, standing silently beside me. "To the government?" I shook my head. "To humanitarian organizations. Places with no budget to buy a system like this, but who need it to distribute food, medicine, emergency relief. I want Dahlia used to save lives, not to serve those who thought they could steal it." Jessica said nothing for a while. Then she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "Why didn't you crush them?" I closed my laptop. Looked up at her. "I had enough to take the entire board to court. If I wanted, Harding Systems could have had its assets frozen, been blacklisted from the federal supply chain, and declared bankrupt within 6 months." "I know," she said. "They know. Everyone knows." I lifted my tea, took a sip and set it down. "But I didn't." Jessica looked at me, her eyes holding something between admiration and confusion. "I didn't erase them to prove I'm strong," I said slowly. "I left my name on this platform to remind them that you can't erase what's true. Not with power. Not with money. Not with closed-door meetings in windowless rooms." She sat across from me, holding June closer to her chest. "Do you think forgiveness means weakness?" I shook my head. "No. Forgiveness only becomes weakness when it means forgetting. But I haven't forgotten. I still remember the day they erased my name from the control panel. I remember my mother's eyes, how she looked right through me like I never existed. I remember every word Noah said on those recordings. And I've kept it all, so it never happens to anyone else." She was quiet, then looked down at her daughter. "I don't know if she'll ever understand it all. But I hope someday she'll see you not as the woman who was betrayed, but the one who didn't become the thing that betrayed her." I looked at June. She stirred gently, lips softly pursed in sleep. "She won't grow up in a world of backroom deals and empty promises," I said. "If I can use Dahlia to keep even a bit of order, a bit of honesty, then I will. No glory needed. No revenge. Just a world where justice isn't some luxury item." Jessica smiled. Not the prideful kind nor a pleading one. Just a mother who had been wrong but was trying to get it right one step at a time. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for Dahlia, but for still having room for people like me." I didn't answer right away. I simply reached for a new folder and signed another line, the order to partially open source the code to nonprofit organizations worldwide. As the pen touched paper, I felt something lift inside me, like unlocking a door that had been bolted shut for years. And through that door, it wasn't bitterness that poured out, but a soft light of something I once thought I'd lost: belief. Not in people, but in the idea that some truths, when held firm, will eventually find their way to stand tall. The Smithsonian building in fall had a quiet beauty to it. Yellow leaves scattered across stone steps, aged bricks glowing under the gentle afternoon sun. Guests lingered outside the main hall, coats in dark colors, invitations tucked neatly into hands. I stood behind the curtain of the grand auditorium, my fingers resting on a note packet, not to read but as a familiar way to steady myself. This was my first public appearance before the media since everything happened. Not in front of the investigation committee. Not to refute or defend anything. But to say something from the heart. On stage, the red velvet curtain lifted to reveal a live holographic model of the Dahlia system in action. Distribution routes, real-time data, aid flows, delivery speeds by affected region. Everything displayed clearly, without clutter or showmanship. Just the way I had written it, through countless quiet nights alone. And in the bottom right corner of the screen, slow white letters appeared against a black background. Invented by Dr. Eva Loren. I heard soft murmurs ripple through the auditorium. A few people turned to one another and nodded. Some eyes looked up as I stepped out from stage left. I wasn't wearing a suit. I chose a knee-length blue dress, high collar, long sleeves, simple. I didn't need sparkle. I needed clarity. The first applause came from the right side. Then from the center rows. Not the loud kind that erupts when a politician steps up. No cheering. Just the kind of applause from people who had just realized something long buried, that there are silent hands that touch the world more deeply than the loudest voices. Standing in the center of the lights, I took a breath, then began. Thank you all for being here today. I once thought I'd never step onto a stage again. I used to sit behind a screen on the other side of the very system you're watching now. I was once erased from the very platform I created. I paused. Looked down at the front row. But I'm not here to tell a sad story. I'm here to talk about silence. About how it can be twisted into complicity. About how it's mistaken for weakness. And about the truth that sometimes, silence is all that's left when you've used up every word to defend what's right. An older man in the front row gave a slight nod. I didn't know who he was, but his gaze made me feel heard, fully. Dahlia wasn't born as a commercial product. It didn't begin as a contract or a campaign. It began with a question. How do we stop wasting what could save someone's life? It began with my father, an old engineer who taught me that sometimes, the only thing holding a system together is one person brave enough to say no. I looked up. My voice no longer trembled. Today, the Dahlia system is being used to coordinate food distribution in 12 disaster zones, 6 mobile medical units, and nearly 30 independent humanitarian organizations around the world. Not because someone paid the highest price, but because someone needed it the most. I glanced toward the wing where Jessica stood with little June. The child held her mother's hand, wide eyes staring straight at me. I smiled at her, a smile I no longer had to force. Someone once asked me, why didn't I destroy everyone who betrayed me? The answer is simple. Because if I meet cruelty with cruelty, then I become just an extension of the very thing I wanted to end. Another round of applause broke out. This time it lasted longer. I waited for it to settle before continuing. I don't need an apology. I just need my name put back where it belongs, not to be remembered, but so that someday another engineer, another girl pushed out of a meeting, erased from a nameplate, cut out of the story, will know she's not walking alone. That's how I ended the speech. No grand finale, no rousing call. Just a bow of the head and a quiet step back. After the event, people came to shake my hand, ask for photos, offer collaborations, sponsorships, speaking opportunities. But I kept those conversations polite. I didn't come for opportunity. I came to close one door and open another, not for me but for those who follow. That night I came home and slipped off my shoes at the porch like always. Inside, June was coloring under the warm yellow light, and Jessica was at the sink, sleeves rolled high, hair loosely tied. The scent of warm cinnamon waffles filled the kitchen. I stepped into the study, opened the file cabinet, and pulled out the very first design draft of Dahlia. An old sheet of paper with scribbled boxes, pencil marks still faint. I framed it in wood, hung it on the wall. No captions. No signature. Because I no longer needed anyone to know who it belonged to. I only needed it to be seen. Exactly as it was meant to be from the start. A system born in silence, existing as a reminder that some things, no matter how erased, find their way back. What would you do if one day your own name was crossed off something you poured your entire life into building? If you've ever been forgotten, pushed out of the room simply because you didn't shout loud enough, would you stay silent or would you rise? I didn't choose revenge. I chose to leave my name where it belonged, not for fame but to prove that truth, even when buried, has a voice of its own. If this story reminds you of someone who quietly endured, who stood firm in the face of power and betrayal, leave a comment. I want to hear your story, your thoughts, or even just a simple line. I've been there too. And if you want to keep hearing real journeys about imperfect families, meaningful silences, and those who were once cast aside but still stood strong, hit subscribe. The next story might be yours.